here we go again. Top favorite books of the year. My personal favorite books of 2025. Welcome. Happy New Year. I hope you had a great start to the year thus far. Today, I will be sharing the best books that I read last year. I have decided on a top 5. In total, I read 34 books in 2025, but who cares? I don't. It was also the first year that I did not rate any books because I felt like rating them took some magic away from reading. And I'm still very happy with my decision, and I think I will continue this throughout 2026. That also means the 5 books that I'm sharing with you today are not necessarily 5-star reads, but rather books that stayed with me, books that had an impact on me, that affected me in a certain way. I definitely have a book that will now go in my favorite books forever, so stay tuned for that one. Also, 2025 really was the year of the big book for me. I read several big books, and 2 of them are included in today's list. So grab a drink, grab a snack if you need one. I don't think this will be too long because, as I've said, it's only 5 books, but I'm excited to share them with you. I have not ranked these books in any type of form, so I'm just simply going through them. I think they are in chronological order, but they are not going from 5th place to 1st place or anything. There's no ranking. Book number 1 that I would like to share with you is Stoner by John Williams. This book had been on my TBR for at least 10 years. I'm not kidding. A friend of mine gave me a copy when we were at university, and he was getting rid of some books, and he gave me this book. And for some reason, I never got to it. I think I was a bit intimidated by it, and I gave it away at some point because I thought, okay, I'm never going to read this. But it kept coming back to me, and then I actually suggested it for a book club. So we read this as our book club read somewhere in the beginning of the year. And I'm so happy that I finally read it, even though it took me such a long time. Not actually to read it, but, to read it. Stoner was published in 1965, I believe. John Williams is a US American writer, and I would categorize this as a campus novel. The story follows the main character, William Stoner. He grows up on a farm, and then he goes to university, originally to study agriculture, but then he discovers his love for literature. So he actually changes his major to literature, much to his parents' dislike. And then we just follow his life, basically. He becomes a professor, so we follow his career. We see some workplace politics. We witness his love life. He gets married, and also he has an affair with one of his colleagues. And then we just follow him basically until he dies. And not much is happening. He leads a very ordinary life, I would say. And not only ordinary, but rather passive. A lot of things just kind of happen to him, and he just goes with it. And even though this doesn't sound like the most compelling story, it was so captivating and so memorable. The writing style is very matter of fact, but at the same time, the prose is so beautiful, and Williams really captures the quiet struggles of life, I would say. I was so invested in this book. I think I heavily identified with William Stoner, especially in the beginning, because, fun fact, I grew up on a farm and I moved away to study English literature. So there was definitely a connection between the two of us. But I feel like also, if you don't relate to him on a very specific level, you will be enticed by this book, and I think everyone could get something from this book. Also, I cried my eyes out during the last 20 pages or so. So that's always a good thing in my book, to be honest. So I know a lot of people talk about this. So if you've been thinking about reading this, highly recommend. Also, I feel like winter is the perfect time to read this. So if you're in the mood, pick this up. Book number 2, I actually don't own physically. I read it on my Kindle through Libby. Book number 2 is Evenings and Weekends by Oisin McKenna. This is a debut novel. Can you believe? I actually couldn't because it's so good and it's so well crafted. The author is from Ireland, but he lives in London, and this book also takes place in London during the summer solstice, so on the longest day of the year. And also, it takes place in June and it's super hot. So, definitely read this during the summer. It's currently snowing outside, so I feel kind of weird talking about this book because the heat plays such a huge role in this novel. As I've said, it's set in 2019 in London. And I think that's what really drew me in, because I feel like this is a book for people who know London. And if you know London, this will make so much more sense to you. So I had a great time just being in that world, in that city for some time. So we have a cast of characters that are a friend group. And not only is London as a city the setting, but also you have this main event that kind of serves as a setting and defines the time frame, the story time, and also serves as the climax of the narrative. And it's this huge party that this friend group is planning. So you have this friend group with several characters. I think most of them are queer, if not all of them. And they are in their 30s, which I love, because if you've been here a little bit longer, I really enjoy reading stories about characters that are similar to me in age. So I'm always happy to find a good book on 30-something characters. And since this is centered around a friend group and you have multiple POVs, there are so many plot threads that kind of come together, as I've said, in this main event, which I loved. I love multiple point of views in a book, but I also love when everything's kind of moving in and then kind of erupting, you know? It's a very heartfelt novel. It deals with questions of sexuality, friendships, relationships, how to be an adult, what's expected of you, what does society expect of you. It deals a lot with the question of financial stability in your 30s. Two of the characters are actually expecting a baby, so that's a huge storyline. How to navigate this, how to enter a new stage of life whilst also honoring the stages that came before and the person that you were before. And just in general, I feel like this book found me at the perfect time. Sometimes the books just find you, and I feel like Evenings and Weekends definitely found me. And I read it on a very hot June weekend, which, how perfect is that? Again, read this during the summer. It's a perfect weekend read. It's very fast paced due to the several point of views and plot threads. I feel like you have to read it in a very small span of time because this book has this urgency in it that makes you want to read very fast. At least that's what happened for me. So, yeah. I'm not sure if I'm ready for the next one. It's so huge in my head, I can't even really talk about it. This is the book that is now a forever favorite and that I will come back to several times throughout my life, I'm sure. Why am I getting emotional? We're talking about John Steinbeck, East of Eden. This book changed something within me on a personal level, but also on a reading level. It changed me as a person and it also changed me as a reader. And I know that's a very hyperbolic statement, but it's true. Published in 1952 by US American writer John Steinbeck. He considered this his magnum opus, which makes sense. And I can't believe that I didn't read this during university, but to be honest, I didn't choose that many American literature courses. So that's how I had never encountered John Steinbeck. I mean, I knew of him, but I had never read anything by him. We read Of Mice and Men in 2024 for book club, and I also loved that. So I'm very confident in saying that he has become one of my favorite authors, and I want to read everything by him. East of Eden, and I'm sure you've heard this so many times, is a family story, a multi-generational family story. It is a retelling of the biblical story of Cain and Abel, and it follows these two families, the Trask family and the Hamilton family. And it is set in California, and the story time spans from the Civil War until World War I. So those are the basics of this huge novel. This edition clocks in at 602 pages, so this is definitely one of the big books that I read this year. I think it is the biggest book that I read this year. No, I read Stephen King's 11/22/63, which is longer, I believe. This book explores the question of good versus evil, as well as free will and family conflict and dynamics. To be a bit more specific, the story asks the question whether our character and our life is predetermined by our family, by our ancestors, by our history, generational history, or rather if we have free will and are able to design our lives the way that we want it to be. And I think that's the main reason why this book built its house in my heart. I don't know. It's so cheesy, but it's the only way I can describe it. Of course, there's also Steinbeck's writing, which is amazing. He describes nature in a way that I can't stop reading. And I'm not the biggest nature girl. And I learned so much about agriculture, which apparently 2025 was the year of agriculture for me. And I didn't get bored. I kept reading because, yes, tell me how to make a well in a California valley. It's as good as they say. If you've ever thought about reading this, do it. I know that it can feel intimidating, and it definitely did to me, but it's so accessible. And if you read this, let me know how it went. I'm not sure if I finished this book or this book finished me. I cried so much during reading this, not only in the end, especially in the end, but also at several other points. I was crying like a baby. This man has a hold on me. I can't believe I'm saying that, but he does. And I have already decided that this summer I will be reading Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I need a sip of tea after this very emotional discussion of East of Eden. This book got me so good that I actually considered writing my American literature professor. Just to tell him, hey, by the way, in my free time, I read John Steinbeck, East of Eden, and it changed my life. I didn't, don't worry. Let's come back to current times. Book number 4, Colony by Anika Nolan. How gorgeous is this cover? This book was published in 2025. It's translated from Swedish by Alice E. Olsen. And the story takes place in Sweden. I wouldn't necessarily call her the main character, but just to have a point of reference, we follow Emily, who's definitely dealing with a burnout. So she decides to go to the Swedish countryside to decompress, get rid of her phone, and just try to get out of this burnout. And in these woods where she's spending her time, she encounters this group that seems to live as a commune. This group compares themselves to an ant colony, hence the title of the book, and that implies that every member of this group has a certain job within this group setting. And similar to evenings and weekends, we have different point of views. Every character gets several chapters to tell the story of how they got to join this group, which that was probably my favorite part of the book. All of these characters' backstories and how certain life events led to them joining this commune in the woods. This book is about isolation, individualism, group dynamics, and how they can escalate in a certain direction. It's about belonging. Again, it's about societal conventions and how to accept them or dismiss them. And if you dismiss them, what becomes the placeholder. Because even though this group is isolated from society, they themselves are a kind of micro society. I love the writing style. It's the perfect mixture of poetic and journalistic. And what I also liked about the way that she portrays the story is that usually cult stories are very much sensationalized in style, I would say, especially in regards to true crime. In this book, she tells the story in a very quiet, as I've said, journalistic way, and I love that. Similar to evenings and weekends, I couldn't wait to get off work or, just have time to read this because I wanted to spend more time with this group and these characters. I feel like following other people online that read and talk about books, this was either hit or miss, and I have to say for me it was definitely a hit. Final book. Book number 5 is another big boy, another big book. So big that at some point my partner had to tape my wrist because it was hurting so much from holding this book whilst reading. I wanted to include this book not because it was necessarily a 5-star read for me, which I know I said I didn't rate any books, but if I had to rate this, I would give it a 4 stars, I would say. But I still wanted to include it because it was the most fun reading experience I had this year. Well, last year. We are talking about House of Leaves, which is our first horror novel on this list. And I feel like it is the perfect representative of that genre. Even though this is often listed as one of the scariest books in the horror genre. Horror. And I have to say, I don't agree. I had the most fun time with this one. Again, this was a book club read. We read this during October as our spooky read. I have to put this down. And it was perfect. I'll try to keep it short and simple, even though this book really isn't. If you want to read this, it's a huge commitment, I have to say. I will give you one plot summary and the rest you have to look up for yourself. This is meta fiction on a documentary film called The Navidson Report, which is set during the 90s. In the documentary, there is this family, and the dad is the documentary maker, and he puts up cameras throughout this house that they move into. And at some point, the house starts to change. The layout starts to change, rooms appear that are not in the original floor plan, and this house grows in size, but only on the inside. From the outside, it looks normal, but on the inside, there is this labyrinth of rooms that keep popping up. And the documentary tries to find out what's happening, basically. But as I've said, this is only one of the plot threads. We have so many frame narratives built around this main narrative, you wouldn't believe. And we not only have several frame narratives, but we also have a variety of text types. There are letters, there are interviews, there are poems, so many poems, there are footnotes. One whole storyline is basically written in footnotes, and I'm sure I missed some text types. We also have multiple narrators, multiple timelines. This is the most complex book I've ever read, but it's also one of the most fun books I've ever read. I knew of this book, but I feel like I was always a bit intimidated by this book. And also, I feel like this is a common theme throughout this video. I was intimidated by most of these books, and I wouldn't call this accessible, to be honest. If you want to read this, you really have to commit. It's a full-time job. If you're curious, just go to the bookshop or just look it up on the internet and just look at the format of the book. It looks crazy. At some point, I had my reading light in hand, I had the book upside down, I had my glasses on, and I was reading and I was going crazy. And I think this is definitely the intention of the book. And it sounds a bit gimmicky, but it doesn't feel like that when you read it. And it's worth it. Trust me, it's really worth it. I had such a good time. I know I keep saying that, but it was so fun. And especially reading it with other people, because I would always text my friend, like, what's going on? Have you read this already? And yeah, highly recommend this as a buddy read or as a book club read, and also perfect for spooky season. Those are the books. Those are my favorite reads of 2025. I feel like I read a little bit less than usual, but I read books that I had been wanting to read for a long time. I read some big books, which I'm really proud of myself because, as we all know, our attention spans are going through it. Of course, I want to know what was your favorite book in 2025, or even give me a little list in the comments. I would be so happy to read them. And thank you for being here in 2025. I'm still having so much fun making YouTube videos, and I will continue throughout 2026. If you have any video suggestions or ideas, also let me know in the comments. And again, I hope you have a great 2026, and I will be seeing you soon. Bye.